Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, we have lots to talk about on this broadcast. Believe it or not, just surpassed the 5th anniversary of the World Health Organization declaring COVID as a global pandemic. We're going to take a look at some articles regarding Israel. You know, they made these ceasefire deals and they're working to get a lot of the hostages back. Not really occurring as fast as many of the family members would like. There's protests as a result taking place in Tel Aviv. And we're also going to talk about this Iran and U.S. relations, because as we know, Iran is refining uranium, and the U.S. wants them not to. Iran says we want to. No one's going to stop us, and we're not going to bend under pressure. But we'll see how that all unfolds this evening. But everyone remembers COVID-19 and how the virus had the global community up in arms. Well, 5 years ago, on March 11th, the WHO classified the virus as a global pandemic. U.S. President at the time, Donald Trump, declared a national emergency. Mask requirements were announced, schools and businesses shut down, and by the end of the year, over 400,000 people had died because of COVID-related illnesses.
Well, even though drug companies rushed to create a vaccine, political divides arose over whether or not the public should be forced to take it. Now, by May of 2023, the World Health Organization said that the pandemic was over. President Biden lifted the emergency that lasted 1,154 days. Now, to date, there have been nearly 1.25 million COVID-related deaths.
But the effects of the pandemic has some lingering effects. According to polls taken afterwards, over half of American citizens lost trust for their government, citing that health officials lied about the effectiveness of the vaccines, as those vaccines, of course, really didn't do what they were supposed to. Also, fewer than 50% of Americans today say that they will get the booster shot this year as a result. Also, 2/3 of Americans say that we are, that is, United States at least, not prepared for the next pandemic 5 years after COVID started.
Right, and if you remember, Katan, the booster shots just kept coming out, you know, booster after booster after booster. Well, have you ever read the ingredient label on your most preferred snack? Ever wonder what all those unpronounceable words are and what those items are doing to your body? Well, this next video sheds some light on our current food crisis and shows how the very thing that's essential for life could be lifeless. Take a look.
From the food we eat to the air we breathe, we're constantly absorbing chemicals, toxins, and plastics that could be poisoning us. How much of the information we're getting is real science and how much is simply fear-mongering? When we scroll through social media, it feels like every day brings a new post revealing how something we use or consume is actually harming us. So today we're looking into the latest research on the health and environmental implications of current consumer trends and breaking down possible practical solutions for those who just want to stay healthy.
Let's get right into it. Absolutely. I think we can keep it pretty simple. My job is probably more simple than your other guest. It's essentially ultra-processed foods, I think, are absolutely the most dangerous, toxic product that we can actually consume. And that is, let's step back a second and define what an ultra-processed food is. It's basically any food that has ingredients that you can't find in your kitchen. You can't easily go find it in your cupboard or something like that. Second definition would be a food with that's in a package, that is in a box, that has multiple ingredients that you can't even understand or even know how to pronounce them. And the third thing would be mostly would be fast food. Most fast foods are ultra processed. And this is a massive, massive problem because this is not real food. And essentially the main products or the main things that in them are seed oils. And we can get into these things, seed oils, trans fats, and sugars, which is a whole topic in itself. And I'm happy to kind of hone in to specific questions.
Right, but Doctor, I mean, first of all, foods with ingredients that we can't find in our kitchen and foods with a long list of ingredients that we don't understand. It's basically everything, right?
Yes, unfortunately, our kids and our diets are now almost 65 to 70% of the food that we consume are calories from ultra-processed food. And I want to make clear, this is not food. It is some kind of edible substance. There is nothing about it that nourishes us. We are basically becoming sick, not from lack of calories. Actually, we have plenty of calories, but no nourishment. Not only do we not have nourishment, this toxic food leads to metabolic dysfunction. Now, metabolic dysfunction is a fancy word that just says that our bodies, our cells can't use the energy from this food in an efficient way, much like a car that's given really nasty gas or gas mixed with a bunch of impurities. How do you expect that car to run well or run very long or break down much sooner than it should? So these toxins lead to metabolic dysfunction, which leads to diabetes, fatty liver, liver disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, dementia, and much, much more.
Well, of course, there's a lot more to that, but, it makes a lot of sense with what we see in the world today globally, that we're seeing so many food allergies. These things weren't existent, 20, 30 years ago, but look at how many foreign ingredients are in our foods that our bodies have to actually fight to get rid of.
Right. Foods used to be very simple to make and not full of all those unpronounceable words, ingredients, or so forth. But today, like the article just said, there's a lot in there that isn't beneficial to our bodies.
And a lot of health experts say if you can't pronounce it, you probably shouldn't eat it. Well, former hard-nosed president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, was arrested in Manila at the airport after returning from a trip from Hong Kong. He was extradited to The Hague. Why? Well, the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, has accused him of crimes against humanity. Duterte questioned the legitimacy of the claims on social media posts that was released by his daughter. Duterte's president was shrouded in systematic executions, cover-ups, and limited due processes during his controversial war on drugs policy.
Well, despite his international criticism, many backed his tough actions on crime and drugs. Now, he said in a speech addressing criminals back in 2016, he said, quote, "If you destroy my country, I will kill you. Make no doubt about it. If you destroy the generation of Filipinos coming up, I will kill you." Now, Duterte's supporters say that his arrest is politically motivated by the current president and adversary, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Now, he said in an address that the decision for Duterte's arrest was because Interpol asked him to do it, and they have commitments, and that they have to live up to those commitments. So he's saying it's not politically motivated, isn't because they're, in the political arena together. It's because they have a commitment.
Yeah, pay no attention to those adversarial views.
Right.
Well, families of captives from the Gaza siege continue to stage protest in Tel Aviv. They want Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to start the second phase of the ceasefire deal and get their loved ones back home. One protester whose loved one is still being held expressed his frustration, saying Netanyahu's interests are not the same as the state of Israel. The vast majority of the public wants all remaining hostages to be returned home immediately, and they're willing to pay the price for that.
Well, Iran's Foreign Affairs Ministry addressed the world this week to squash any idea that it was involved in the latest violence in Syria. The Iranian spokesman had this to say, quote, "The accusation that Iran was involved in Syria's events was completely baseless and rejected. We believe that pointing the finger at Iran and its allies is a misdirection and entirely misleading and diversionary narrative. Now, such claims are absolutely unfounded and represent a cliched and oversimplified approach to developments in Syria, which will do nothing to improve the situation, end quote.
Wow. Well, the Foreign Affairs spokesman went on to warn France, Britain, and Germany, also known as the E3, that the misuse of the snapback mechanism under the 2015 nuclear deal, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, will be met with a decisive and proportionate response from Iran. He said Iran sees no justification to trigger the use of the snapback mechanism, pointing out it cannot be used as a quote-unquote tool for leverage.
Well, the United States is continuing to apply more and more pressure on Iran against its nuclear program. Now, Iran's economy is feeling that extreme pressure, but Iran stressed it will not negotiate as long as the maximum pressure campaign continues. Foreign Ministry spokesman made these comments, quote, "The use of this duality of war or negotiation itself indicates a lack of seriousness about dialogue and negotiation," end quote.
He concluded the Islamic Republic of Iran has never deviated from negotiation in this sense, but as was firmly stated, negotiation under pressure and through it is meaningless, and negotiation cannot be wasted in such sense.
Well, continuing with Iran, the Ayatollah says that Iran will not give under pressure, but U.S. President Donald Trump wants a deal with Iran. Now, there's always a give and take in order to reach a compromise, but what will be the moves of both countries to reach an end goal that's beneficial for both countries? Take a look at this next video for more on this topic.
We won't negotiate under pressure. The words of Iran's top leader after Donald Trump offered to talk about its nuclear program. The US president threatened war would be the alternative. So is another nuclear deal with Iran possible? And if so, on what terms? US President Donald Trump wants a deal with Iran over its nuclear program. He's reached out for talks while also tightening sanctions on Iran's economy. For now, Tehran says it won't negotiate under pressure. It was Trump who pulled the US out of the previous nuclear deal, saying it didn't go far enough. Is there now scope for a diplomatic solution that's acceptable to both sides? And what will it take to get them to the negotiating table? We'll go to our panel in just a few moments, but first this report from Fintan Monaghan.
Iran's leaders make their position clear. They view overtures by the Trump administration not as an invitation to talk about its nuclear program, but as a demand for concessions.
Some bullying governments insist on negotiations. Their negotiation is not aimed at resolving issues. They negotiate to dictate their will.
The US and other world powers say they want to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. President Donald Trump says he wrote a letter to Tehran seeking talks, but also said that other options are on the table.
Hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other, but the other will solve the problem.
The last time Trump came into office in 2016, a deal was in place. Iran had agreed to curb its nuclear activities in exchange for relief from sanctions. It was Donald Trump who pulled America out of the agreement, demanding further concessions on Iran's military capabilities and its backing of armed groups. With Trump back in office again, Iran expects more of the same.
The problem is not just the nuclear issue. They raise new demands that will definitely not be met by Iran. There will be demands about defense capabilities and international capabilities. They will urge Iran not to do certain things, not to meet certain people, not to go to a certain place, not to produce some items. Your missile range should not be more than a certain distance. Is it possible for anyone to accept these?
Iran has always denied it intends to develop nuclear weapons, saying its program is for civilian use. But since the collapse of the deal, Tehran has been increasing its enrichment of uranium. This could allow it to build a weapon more quickly if it decided to do so.
We need to engage as soon as possible because time is passing. You have seen my reports on the activities in Iran. The amount of enriched uranium at 60% is growing very, very fast. All of the activities are being carried out.
Iran's economy has been badly affected by sanctions for years. and the US is determined to tighten them even further. Without diplomacy, Tehran is likely to continue enriching uranium, which could put the two powers on a collision course. America wants talks, but for now, Iran isn't budging, until it believes an acceptable deal may be on the table.
Well, you know, President Trump initially pulled out of that agreement, not for leniency, but because he said it wasn't tough enough on Iran. And of course, Iran has continued to push closer and cross what President Obama called the red line. But of course, they're working towards their own interests, not concerned with the international community thinks.
Right, and Iran, this one's going to be a tough one for Trump if he can get a deal, a peace deal on this, because Iran seems to be taking a very tough stance and not willing to budge. You know, most of the time, the countries are willing to, okay, you know, we could do this if you do that, but Iran is like, no, you know, you're the one that's going to benefit, not us. No deal.
That's right. Well, could Russia be heading for a truce with Ukraine? President Vladimir Putin is in support of a truce with Ukraine, but wants to talk with President Donald Trump before making any concessions. In recognition of the offer, Putin thanked President Trump, but then says there are issues we must discuss with our American colleagues, stating that he would like to call President Trump.
Well, and what are these conditions, Katan? Well, Russia wants to take back the areas seized by Ukraine, so they've actually named several areas in the Kursk region of Russia. And Putin also demands that if there is a pause, he doesn't want Ukraine to take that opportunity to rearm, train, and mobilize more troops. And, you know, he wants a long-term peace agreement, not just a little break, to where Ukraine can build its forces back up and come right back and attack Russia.
Yeah, and ideally, it would be a permanent ceasefire. I think that's what everybody really wants. Well, Mark Ritter, the NATO Secretary General, met at the White House with President Trump, and in their conversation, the president told Ritter he would like to meet with President Putin and believes his comments are very promising. Now, the U.S. president also said he told his special envoy Steve Witkoff to discuss Ukrainian territory with President Putin as he was meeting with him that evening.
Well, Trump told the media, quote, "We've been discussing with Ukraine land and pieces of land that would be kept and lost and all of the other elements of a final agreement," end quote. So it's looking like both superpowers are expressing the desire to meet with one another and discuss a possible truce, but President Putin still has made no commitment to end the war in Ukraine.
Well, Putin has even expressed he would only agree to a temporary ceasefire if it would lead to a permanent one. For more details on the conditions President Putin has concerning a temporary truce with Ukraine, please take a look at this next video from Al Jazeera.
Russia's president says he agrees with the 30-day proposal to stop fighting in Ukraine, but says any ceasefire should lead to long-term peace. Vladimir Putin says while he supports a ceasefire, further negotiations are needed, and that includes talks with US President Donald Trump. Dorsa, Moscow saying the proposed ceasefire deal then is a possibility, but that there's detail that they need to iron out. Is that right?
Yes, that is what the Russian President Vladimir Putin was just saying during a press conference after meeting with the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. According to Putin, he's in favor of a temporary ceasefire only if it leads to a permanent one. And there are nuances that need to be worked out. There are a few issues Putin highlighted. One, that this is not going to be used as an opportunity for Ukraine to rearm and regroup and have another forced mobilization and then restart the fighting. That's one of the things Russia's looking for in terms of guarantees. This is something they will address with the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who is in Moscow at the moment. The other issue that Russia has, and they are going to raise it with the Americans, is the issue of how to monitor this ceasefire in terms of who is going to monitor it to make sure it is not violated. And Vladimir Putin said that the situation on the ground in the combat zones, the 2,000-kilometer front lines, is rapidly changing. He's highlighting the fact that Russian forces are making advances not only in eastern Ukraine, but also in the western part of Russia and the Kursk region after Ukrainians launched a surprise incursion in that region in August of last year. And since then, the Russian forces have managed to retake nearly 90% of the territory that Ukraine occupied until recently. There's about 5 settlements left, or about 200 square kilometers that Ukrainians still occupy, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. So these are the issues that Vladimir Putin highlighted. He also thanked Donald Trump for his efforts to try and bring an end to this conflict. And he said that he's going to speak with the U.S. president soon to pass on his concerns and questions that continue at this point. But for the time being, making it clear that Russia is in favor of ending this conflict, but it has to be clearly on their terms.
And unlike Iran, Katan, it does look like President Putin is willing to negotiate with President Trump. You know, they're both laying out, this is what I'd like, this is what I'd like. And it does seem like there could be an actual truce if they work out the small details.
And he used the words permanent ceasefire. He wants to see a permanent ceasefire, which means an end to the war and an end to the fighting. And of course, then you can actually start to rebuild both sides.
Right, which only makes sense to have it permanent if you're going to come to a peace agreement.
That's right.
Well, so what is U.S. President Donald Trump's biggest concern in this and other disagreements across the globe? Well, it is nuclear weapons. Now, Trump said in a TV interview on Sunday morning, quote, "Everyone has to spend all this money on something that if it gets used, it's probably the end of the world." Please pay attention to his statements in this next video.
The level of destruction is beyond anything you can even imagine.
Donald Trump has warned monster nuclear weapons could end the world as he sounded the alarm over atomic Armageddon.
Everybody has to spend all this money on something that if it's used, it's probably the end of the world.
The president issued the stark warning in a TV interview on Sunday morning after he floated new arms controls with Russia and China. In an interview with Fox News, Trump said he believes nukes are one of the greatest threats to mankind. The US has the second largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world, with around 5,000 weapons. Russia has the most, with nearly 6,000, with China a distant third, with around 350. Nuclear weapons have only been used in anger twice, when the US bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II. The 78-year-old went on to say that too many people are focused on claims of climate change, rather than tackling the global threat posed by nukes. The president said the threat of nuclear weapons is immediate, warning, "It could happen tomorrow." Trump explained, "I watched Biden for years say the existential threat is from the climate. I said no. The greatest is sitting on shelves in various countries called nuclear weapons that are big monsters that can blow your heads off for miles and miles and miles. Russia has repeatedly rattled the nuclear saber in the war in Ukraine, and Putin has long threatened the world with his ambitious super weapons, such as the Satan II nuke. Trump has long vowed to be the president of peace and said he wants to end wars worldwide, especially the raging conflict in Ukraine.
On Russia, if I may, President Putin is bombing Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you still believe him when he tells you that he wants peace?
Yeah, no, I believe him. I believe him. I think we're doing very well with Russia. But right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine. I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. And they don't have the cards. That in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now.
Well, Katan, Trump promised before he was elected president or re-elected president that he said he was going to, get peace right away with Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, and of course it's been a little bit, but nevertheless, his focus has been on getting a peace deal between those two countries. Now he's also talking about Iran, and he's got his ideas in other countries as well. So he really is looking for peace, but you can kind of see the reasoning. He understands how devastating the use of nuclear weapons would be. And it reminded me a lot about some of the teachings of Yeshua Hawkins that we've played in some of these, his classic messages, that there would be a great buildup to nuclear war, but then peace, true peace, or they would declare peace, but after that, those nuclear weapons would be used.
That's right.
Well, if you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call the House of Yahweh at 1-800-613-9494. You can visit the House of Yahweh by going to any of their websites, Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, and Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website, YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And of course, don't forget the Israel Says and Ask Israel programs available to aid you in your study and understanding of the Scriptures. You can find those programs by going to YisraelSays.com and AskIsrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another classic message from Yeshua Hawkins explaining the Scriptures that scholars have wondered about for years. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.